You're watching Fox 8 Overtime, brought to you by your Southern Quality Ford dealers. Built Ford tough.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende. Sitting next to me, riding co-pilot, as he customarily does, is Andre Johnson Jr. on this Wednesday here in the city of New Orleans. Before we get started, though, be sure to like, share, rate, review wherever you get your podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, do yourself a favor and subscribe to this channel, and the little bell notification will go off whenever we drop a new video. And today we've got a great video for you as well. But first things first, Andre, how are you doing on this hump day Wednesday here in the city of New Orleans?
I'm doing good. You know, I talk about king cake a lot on this podcast, Sean, because it's really what I'm passionate about right now. Had some Randazzles earlier. We had Don Fong the other day. Had some Antoines last week. I'm really, stacking up these king cakes, trying to see which one I like the most.
Get like a bunch every day here at the station. We have obviously a lot of the cooking show down in the kitchen studio there, and we just get a lot. So I've had quite a bit, as well, over the last couple of days, last couple of weeks here in New Orleans, and for good reason. Is obviously it is Mardi Gras week here in the city of New Orleans. There's also a lot of moving and shaking going on in the Saints world. Before we get to the Saints present, I got to bring up the Saints past.
Of course.
This is the greatest day in Saints history as far as I was concerned. February the 7th, 14 years ago today, your New Orleans Saints won the Super Bowl over the Indianapolis Colts down in Miami, Florida. If you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, I posted a picture of myself and my former coworker, Rob Ennis, on the field as it happened. Drew Brees on the stand behind us. My former photographer, Edwin Gu, you see kind of the back of his head as he's shooting all the stuff happening on the field afterwards. It was chaotic on the field after. I was working as Jim Henderson's spotter in the radio booth during the game. So after the game, went and did some TV work, obviously. I was doing radio during the game and TV before the game. Just a magnificent experience. Day we never thought would ever happen, and it finally did. You were a young man back then.
Yeah.
Were you still in high school?
Yeah.
What was where were you back in February 7th, 2010?
My day was a lot less exciting, seeing that I was only 14 years old at the time. In
Youngster.
9th grade, I was probably watching the game. We probably got together as a family, either by my Uncle June or my grandma, mommy's house, one of them. So I probably got together with the family, watched the game. I was actually a big Saints fan back then. So, I probably had my Marcus Colston jersey on. Marcus Colston was my favorite player. Reggie Bush. I had a Reggie Bush jersey thing going on. So, yeah, it was a very exciting day for me. And it's weird being so young watching something like that, because I didn't go through the pain. I didn't go through the paper bag days because I was so young. So it's like, but people my age, when we kind of got into football, it was when Drew Brees got here.
You're right, right.
All we know in regards to the Saints for a long time was
you bypassed. My God, the suffering you were able to bypass.
We just know success. I mean,
being born when you were born at a certain time. That week in Miami was unbelievable. They had us up in a hotel on the water. We enjoyed the Super Bowl week, both from a work standpoint and from entertainment standpoint. I'll just leave it at that. We enjoyed ourselves down in Miami. And, man, it just doesn't feel like 14 years ago, but it really has been. And those years keep stacking up. We just would have thought by now the Saints would have gotten another one, maybe in 2011, maybe 2018. But
been knocking on that door.
It didn't happen. And here they are going into the 2024 offseason, 2024 season. They're trying to get back. I don't know where you fall as far as how close you feel they are. Every team is relatively close. If you make the right move, you can turn it around fairly quickly in the NFL. And, they were one game away from the postseason the last 2 years, so that's definitely glass half full type of feeling. But glass half empty is they've had to make a lot of moves since then, and they have made a lot of moves. We've heard about the reports of obviously Clint Kubiak, and now we're seeing the trickle-down effect of that in terms of Kubiak coming in. Some other coaches are now exiting. So who do we have exiting for the Saints?
We've got Ronald Curry is now the latest name on the way out, and we talked about it earlier, Sean. It's almost surprising that Dennis Allen, the staff that he came in with, the guys that he hired because he liked them, the Doug Marones, the Pete Carmichaels, now the Ronald Currys, Those guys are out the door, and it seems like moving forward, this staff, at least on the offensive end, is going to be built around Clint Kubiak, right now the 49ers pass game specialist, soon to be reportedly the Saints' new offensive coordinator. And that's, it's expected in a way. You want your new OC to be able to kind of put his staff together, but it's almost a little head-scratching because at the end of the day, this is the offensive coordinator, Sean, not the head coach.
Right. Well, look, that had to be the sell. I mean, look, those offensive coordinator positions were in demand this year. There was a lot of them, and you had to fight off a lot of other teams to get your guy, and that had to be part of the sell, aside from probably a lot of money to get Kubiak to come here as he gets his opportunity to basically pick his offensive staff. So let's check it out. I mean, Marrone is out, obviously. As we know, so you need an O-line coach. Joel Thomas took the job, obviously, with the Giants. You need a running backs coach. They fired Cody Burns, so you need a wide receivers coach. With Ronald Curry leaving, you now need a quarterback coach. So if you add that up, combined with last offseason, if you go offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, O-line, running back, receiver, QB, secondary linebacker, D-line, special teams, I think the only two, this is the third year of DA, the only two main position coach / assistants still on the original staff was Michael Hodges and Darren Rizzi. Now, there's some offensive assistants and defensive assistants that have carried over, but I'm talking about main position coaches. Hodges and Rizzi is it. And if I'm right here, DJ Williams, who helps out with quarterbacks, Kevin Petrie, who was an offensive assistant, who has been with the organization for a long time, and then Brian Young, who used to be a player here. It's another assistant that's still here from DA's original staff. But that is a large amount of turnover on your coaching staff in just 2 seasons, coming off a 9-8 season. And this is generally the sign of, we gave you a chance to kind of rotate your coaching staff, go through your coaching staff. Now it's on you, buddy. This is truly, I said it last year, but it's truly the case now. This is 1,000% Dennis Allen's team. It's his coaching staff, it's his quarterback, and it's going to be his roster going forward. So it's expected, you out there, you wanted a new offense, and you're going to get it. Because you're not just going to get a new offensive coordinator, you're going to get a whole lot of new position coaches offensively as well. So you asked for it, you got it. Let's see what happens when it finally shows up on the field coming the fall.
Absolutely, and you mentioned it a little bit right there, but this is a huge year for Dennis Allen because, we talked about how great the hire was, DA bringing in this offensive coordinator, but I know last season they said you've got to make the playoffs. They didn't make the playoffs, but DA survived. But there's only so many times that you're going to come into a season with a roster and a team seemingly good enough to get into the playoffs in the NFC South, one of the weakest conference, the division in football. There's only so many times that you're going to get away with not making the playoffs. You've got a new OC. You've got a lot of new head coaches or new assistant coaches. Dennis Allen, this is your year. This is the year for you to make the playoffs because if not, Drew Brees told us last week, he believes this could be a top 5, top 10 offense. In a situation where the Saints actually next year are a top 5, top 10 offense under Clint Kubiak, you've already got half the staff built in Clint Kubiak's image. Mm-hmm. If something happens to where the Saints don't make the playoffs next year, but that offense is popping, hey, Dennis Allen, he might have just hired his future replacement in Clint Kubiak.
Yeah, We're getting out in front right there with that. And
very important year.
Certainly is very important year. And I go back to something else Drew Brees said, and it really it put to light sort of the simplicity of where the Saints actually are. Where are they? How much better do they need to be? Last 2 seasons, it came down to one game. It's not like they're a 2-14, a 2-15 team, or a 5-11 or 5-12 team. This year was a 9-8 team. Probably, they had that record last year. They make the playoffs, but this past year wasn't good enough. And obviously, the year before they were 7-10, 8-9 would have gotten them in. One game. That's how fine the line is, and I say it all the time. The line between winning and losing, the line between postseason and playoff team versus another team picking in the middle of the pack is ultra thin. That's what it boils down to. It's one game. So all these changes, You got to figure out a way to basically win one more game. And they're banking this will be enough. And like you said, this is it for DA. I mean, you no more excuses. It's got to happen. You were able to pick your quarterback. You were able to pick your coordinator. You were able to go through your defensive coordinators. You know, you got rid of the guy originally that the first time around, and Richard. I know D-line coach just escaped my name. Nielsen. He ended up leaving on his own. But this whole roster is shaped in your image, how you want it. You have now been able to pick your guys. So it's time for the results to start showing up, obviously, if you're Dennis Allen. One of those decisions will be, well, not one of them. There will be a lot of decisions being made when it comes to free agents. One free agent is a man we know quite well, a man covered for quite some time now. Always entertaining, always a great topic of conversation, especially for this podcast, especially for the position that he plays and just the personality that he is. And that is quarterback Jameis Winston. We talked about on our Monday pod, Derek Carr going on a podcast. Well, so did Jameis Winston, one of the more popular podcasts out there in sports right now with Big Cat and PFT on the Pardon My Take podcast. And this has really been, it was quite an interview, a very entertaining interview, but that's where we're going to go with the big picture right now.
Absolutely. It was very Jameis. Jameis sitting down for about an hour and a half and just talking about everything. And one thing that he really made clear, Sean, there were a lot of jokes. He joked around. He talked about, the origin of eating a W, where that came from. He said he wanted to be a podiatrist when he grew up. I learned that about Jameis
And just for the
Winston
audience, what is a podiatrist again?
A foot doctor. He wanted to, he said,
Of course he wanted to be one, of course.
He was talking about how Mike Evans was so successful. He said it's because of his feet. And he knows that because he wanted to be a podiatrist, foot doctor. Fun fact for you. You could use that, But, one thing I really took about Jameis is that he is very clear. All jokes aside, he still wants to be a starter in the NFL. And when you talk about somebody in the position that Jameis is, Geno Smith is almost a folk hero for backup quarterbacks with hopes of reviving their careers. Geno was about a year away from being a trivia question, Sean.
Right.
Who's the former first-round pick that was, drafted by the Jets and played in, New York as a Giant and all of that stuff. And he's playing relevant football in Seattle. Can you see a point where Jameis, if he were to leave New Orleans, because he certainly can you see a point where Jameis can start in the NFL again? Well,
first off, let me just say this. I wasn't able to get through the entire 90 minutes. I got through probably about 50 of the podcast. It was a great interview. If you like just sheer entertainment and just curiosity and just, if podcasts are your thing, that interview is for the long form interview format. If you're into that, it really was good. I intend to finish it, but I got through a lot of the highlights of it. First off, he compared being a starting quarterback to being Moses.
Yep.
Fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic comparison. He talked about LASIK surgery, eyeballs burning. But you can tell, even when he talks, how much energy, natural energy that guy has just in any situation, even in a somewhat relaxed environment. You can feel that energy.
You'll run through that brick wall for Jameis Winston.
Right. I mean, so, excuse me, that's what really stood out as well. He says he could throw a 98-mile-an-hour fastball still. How about that, playing baseball?
I believe him.
Yeah, interesting. But back to what we were saying in terms of where he's at in his football career. Go listen to the entire interview if you haven't listened to it. It really is, it's something. I mean, you get the full scope of the Jameis Winston experience. But first off, what I appreciated about Jameis was, at least here the last 4 years, because it's been a unique, he's had to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
How willing he was to accept his role in 2023. Remember, he arrived here as a backup to Drew Brees, then signed again in 2021, won a quarterback competition with Taysom Hill, got hurt, was a free agent again. The team was going to go with Deshaun Watson. Then they were able to get Jameis Winston back. He returned to be the starter, got hurt. Andy Dalton comes in, plays fairly well. He never got his job back to Andy Dalton. I thought it was over at that point. Then last offseason, lo and behold, he adjusts his schedule, he adjusts his contract to come back to the Saints, willingly accepting Derek Carr, being the backup to Derek Carr. It honestly felt like those two guys, Derek Carr and Jameis Winston, that could have provided. I mean, we've seen situations like that where that could have been some tension. It really felt like to me, and I was around there quite a bit, like those two guys got along fairly well, and Jameis certainly served in his role as the backup, providing information, telling him what he sees. Even the times where he was down, kind of dancing on the sideline with him in the Atlanta game. Again, only Jameis. And he was able to basically what could look like on the surface as a tense situation, or that can get a little iffy, especially with the way the season went. So where it never really felt like there was a division of the Carr group and the Winston group. It never really never really felt like it got to that point. And it kind of felt like it could have. It probably did with a lot of people watching right now.
So the fan base definitely
but I never got that sense within the locker room. And that's not easy, especially when we talk about Jameis Winston, number 1 overall pick. Remember, he was the guy.
Yeah.
He was the guy
Fresh
back
off
in
winning that
2015. I was in Tampa, the season finale of 2014, when Tampa was doing all they can to lose that game because they wanted to get Jameis Winston. I was there. I saw all of a sudden they stopped throwing the ball in the second half. It was unbelievable to watch. Okay, so all that being said, realistically, where is Jameis Winston, the football player? Honestly now, and I know this is a little unfair, but honestly, given he had been in the system for 4 years, 4th year here, been a starter, I thought he would have been a little bit better in relief this year in the 3 opportunities that they got. The Green Bay game, where they lost the lead. Minnesota, where he provided a little juice, but you also saw he was a little bit of a roller coaster. And I think that was probably the stretch he was able to play the longest. Threw the 2 touchdowns, threw 2 or 3 interceptions in that game. And then Detroit, that was later in the game, so I'm not going to hold that too much against him, but he missed a couple of throws in that. Would have been interesting to see how he would have been had he gotten a full week of reps and then started the game from start to finish. He got practice reps with the first team a lot this year, but never actually played in those games as a starter. We'll leave you back in New Orleans. It certainly sounds like he's a guy that's preparing for life after New Orleans. I'd be shocked. I really would be if Jameis was back, honestly. And this is not just Jameis. The impression that I've always gotten is the organization is pretty high on Jake Haener, at least in terms of his development into being a potential solid backup quarterback in the NFL. So I think when he was drafted and given the training camp that he had last year, I think the team is certainly liking where Jake Haener is. In fact, I had a guy within the organization reach out to me sort of unsolicited and said, let me tell you about Jake Haener. This guy's unbelievable. This guy's impressive in meetings, so wise beyond his years. And usually when I'm trying to find out information about players or what's happening, I'll reach out to them and they get back to me. This guy reached out to me without me even kind of looking for the information. So I thought that certainly stood out. In fact, there were times during camp where you and I discussed this yesterday where whispers, is Jameis safe here? Given the way Haener was playing at the time. For the record, I never went that far. I always felt like it was still a little too early for Jake Haener, and I think when training camp played itself out and preseason played itself out, it was obvious Jameis still needed to be the number 2. So, all that being said, I think with the year under his belt, I could see the organization, if they don't go via draft with another quarterback, I could see the organization feeling somewhat comfortable with where Haener's at in his development to at least develop into the number 2. Point being, Jameis doesn't want to be the number 2 anymore.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned Jake Haener. Jake Haener was the training camp MVP last year. He didn't look like a rookie in training camp. Now, he did get on the field in preseason, and that is where he looked like a rookie. Jameis Winston shined in the preseason, so that's kind of what shut down that maybe Jake Haener can take that spot. But the question for the Saints moving forward, if Jameis does leave, because like I said, listening to that podcast, that didn't sound like a backup. That sounds like a guy who knows that he can still be a starting quarterback in the NFL and was very clear about the fact that that's what he's looking for. So the question for the Saints, are you okay going forward with Jake Haener as QB2? Time will tell there. But, when it comes to Jameis, getting back to Jameis, where could he go post-New Orleans?
Well,
you just think of a few teams. And, you've got Cam Newton once infamously said it. There's not 32 quarterbacks better than me. And if you look at the quarterbacks that were playing football last year, I don't think there's 32 quarterbacks better than Jameis Winston. Would you take Jameis over Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi, whoever's starting in New England? If Aaron Rodgers doesn't, get back to form in New York, you've got Zach Wilson. Give me Jameis. The Giants, Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito. I'll take Jameis. The Commanders, Sam Howell. The Steelers, I think, I put them in all caps here. Kenny Pickett, that is a wonderful team defensively. They've got some great weapons on offense. Kenny Pickett has not been the guy so far. Can Jameis Winston take Kenny Pickett's job? Kirk Cousins is a big free agent right now. If he leaves Minnesota, could Jameis slide into Minnesota? Jameis himself talked about Atlanta, being from the South, liking the Atlanta. Now, Atlanta, I think they'll draft a quarterback, but if by some crazy circumstance they don't, can Jameis beat out Desmond Ridder? Denver, you know how Sean Payton likes his former Saints.
Yeah.
Denver's always going to be in the conversation. So I think that there are places in the right situation that Jameis can step in and make a difference.
All right, so I hear what you're saying. I do. Here's where I'm going to not disagree, but maybe just pivot my line of thinking when it comes to Jameis. What is his best fit? Can he still be a productive starter? What is his market? That, to me, is key. Remember, he was available 3 different times in 3 straight off seasons, and he came to New Orleans every single time. And he made it known in those off seasons he wanted to be a starting quarterback. Until this past year, obviously, when Derek Carr was named the starter, and he very graciously accepted the role as Derek Carr's backup. To me, all legitimate questions. We know he wants to start. We know that. I think he's made it very clear.
Oh, yeah.
If not before, definitely now, after going on one of the most popular podcasts, in the world right now. I mean, that's one of the most popular podcasts you have. So, I just don't know if there's a team out there that's willing to basically go into the offseason, locate Jameis Winston, identify Jameis Winston as our guy, our starter. Here are the keys. Lead us to victory. Go be Moses, like he says. Go be Moses. I truly think Jameis's next time starting on the field is not going to come via that route. It's going to come, best case scenario, try to sign somewhere where the starter may be on shaky ground. You mentioned a couple of teams, or somehow find a team where there could be a competition because his natural energy and charisma takes over a locker room. His natural arm talent is something to watch and practice, especially when he's hitting. That's why he wins almost every competition when it comes to natural quarterback competitions he's ever been in, and get to one of those places where, or you could get to a place where they're obviously going to draft a guy, but that draft pick is not going to be ready.
Yep.
And you're the bridge guy. Get some fresh tape with you as a starter, and maybe that catapults you to Geno Smith status,
maybe
where
even
you
Joe
find
Flacco.
a spot, whatever the case may be. And again, the market dictates, and you don't really know what options are out there. I mean, I laid out ideal scenarios, but that's just that, ideal scenarios. The reality is, are you going to get those opportunities? What if the only chance you get is you can come be an established starter's backup? That's the only thing you got. It's the only thing you got. So he has such energy. He's such a force. He's such a great teammate. He brings a lot of juice. But I do think when you talk about Jameis Winston's offseason, as a lot of things that deal with Jameis Winston, there are a lot of things surrounding it, and there are a lot of factors you have to consider, because I just don't think it's a clear cut. He's our guy. Bring him in. Let's sign him. For instance, you have Winston, that's a free agent. Baker, that's a free agent. Yep. Kirk Cousins, that's a free agent. I would take Kirk over Jameis.
Yeah.
And then, depending on how you view Baker Mayfield's last season and Jameis's last season, I'm sure a lot of y'all would pick Baker. Some of y'all would pick Jameis. Either way, he wouldn't be the top of the market at that point. So I do think that it's something to really watch. But you mentioned some teams. I said the Steelers, Falcons, Broncos, Commanders, Patriots. Commanders and Patriots are probably drafting guys. If those guys aren't ready, Jameis could step in and be the bridge guy for a few games, a few weeks, maybe a full season. Who knows? But I do know this. Jameis Winston wants to start, and we'll just see who will allow him to eventually become Moses.
Absolutely, because I agree with you. I think the days of saying we are going to bring Jameis Winston in and he is going to change our franchise, I think those days are over for now. I think even in the Geno Smith situation, he wasn't brought over to be the starter. It was supposed to be Drew Lock.
He had to beat him out.
And he beat Drew Lock out. So with Jameis, you're not going to bring him in to be the face of your franchise. You're going to bring him in, and if there's a young quarterback or a shaky quarterback that, like you mentioned, he can beat out in practice. And all those teams I mentioned, Kenny Pickett's, the Desmond Ritters, the Sam Howells. I think if it comes down to it, he could beat those guys out. That's his pathway back to being a starting quarterback.
If somehow the Falcons aren't able to get a quarterback in the first round and it's Desmond Ritter, Jameis needs to run to the table. Yeah. But, I mean, Atlanta would have to want him in that scenario. Would Atlanta go with another option at that point? I don't know.
That's true. We'll see. He gets to play against both of his exes in the NFC South.
Mm-hmm. As most things with Jameis, always fascinating to watch. You just never know which way it's going to turn.
Yeah,
I think that'll do it for us. Anything else before we get out of here?
There's one more thing that Jameis said that I found interesting as a PlayStation guy, as a Madden player. Jameis specifically mentioned maybe part of the reason why he hasn't won a Super Bowl is because he didn't play enough Madden. Because he didn't play enough Madden as himself and win the Super Bowl in Madden. He says he just hasn't managed to win the Super Bowl in Madden. It's hard to win the Super Bowl. He says he hasn't seen that picture of himself holding up the Lombardi trophy. So, that's very important. If you want to be successful, you got to play Madden. You got to see yourself in successful situations so that one day you can put yourself in that situation. Whatever it looks like for you. For Jameis, that is hoisting the Lombardi. He says he played in NCAA. That's why he won the Madden.
Via Madden.
Yeah.
Never changed Jameis Winston. All right. Speaking of that, we're gonna we'll kind of exit on that. So for Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.